Hello, I'm Thomas Rodi, Archbishop of Mobile, and today I'd like to share a thought with you about the Solemnity of Christ the King, the Feast of Christ the King that we celebrate on the last Sunday of the church year. Before we begin the new church calendar, the new church year in Advent, we conclude the church year by remembering Christ is King. King of our lives, King of our world, King of the universe. Christ is King. The Feast of Christ the King was established by Pope Pius XI in 1925, and he did so for a very important reason. In those years following World War I, in Europe, country after country fell under dictatorships. Some were fascist, some were communist, and most of these dictators had no use for God. They put themselves above God, or they denied there was a God. And in those increasingly secular years in the 1920s, as Europe slid into the horrors of World War II, the Pope said we need to remember that Christ is our King over everything. And to him alone belongs our primary loyalty. That message is as important today as it was in 1925. Pope St. John Paul II, when he was a priest and a bishop in his native land of Poland, had lived under the Nazis' occupation and then lived under the communist oppression. And the Nazis and the communists, as different as they were, had this in common. They told the people, your dignity, your fundamental rights come from the state. The Nazis told the people, your dignity, your rights come to you because you are a member of the Third Reich. The communists said, your dignity, your rights come to you because you are a worker for the state. And John Paul II, as priest, as bishop, and later as pope, told the people this is a lie. Your dignity, your fundamental rights come to you because God created you. Our rights, our dignity come ultimately from God because we are created in the image and likeness of God. And spurred on by this powerful message of John Paul II, the people of Poland overthrew the communist regime in their country in a revolution in which not one bullet was fired. In 2010, Pope Benedict XVI made a state visit to England, and he addressed Parliament in Westminster Hall, the very hall in which in 1535 St. Thomas More was sentenced to death because he would not accept King Henry VIII being the head of the church in England. And Thomas More, as he was condemned to death, said, I die the king's good servant, but God's servant first. Thomas More knew that his ultimate king was Christ, and that Christ was king over everything, even earthly kings. And as Pope Benedict addressed Parliament in that historic room, he basically told English Parliament and all Western secular democracies that there's a challenge that secular democracies have to face. Because in our increasingly secular world where we don't want to acknowledge God, we don't want to talk about God or God's authority over us, Pope Benedict in effect asks, then where do our rights come from? Where does our dignity come from if we don't want to admit that there's a God? And the only answer a secular democracy can give if there is no God is that our rights and our dignity, therefore, have to come from the government, come from the state. And that's the same lie of which the Nazis and the communists were guilty. And that's why this message of Christ the King is so important, because we know that our rights, our dignity come from God who created us in his own image. That is a statement of faith, but it's also a statement that the founders of this country put into our foundational document, the Declaration of Independence. They wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The founders of this country said to the King of England, "Our dignity, our rights, do not come from any king or any parliament or any court. They come from God." And good people, our founders would agree with us. If there is no God, then where do they come from? You know, I'm very disturbed sometimes when I hear intelligent people quote that statement from the Declaration of Independence, but they leave out those three important words, by our Creator. They'll just say that all men are created equal and are endowed with certain unalienable rights. No, endowed by our Creator. Otherwise, we rely upon the government for our rights, our dignity. And whatever the government gives, the government can take away. Good people, Christ is our King, and we are created by God. And because of that, we have a dignity that no one can take away, in which we're called to respect in one another. Thank you, and may God bless you.